David Pantano is a scholar, a gentleman, and a living initiate. His work and life goal, to shed light on the native Italic mysteries, is commendable. For too long has that area remained a mystery for those in the English-speaking world. We've all heard of the magic schools and secret societies in the West. We've heard of German Rosicrucian schools and mystics, French occultists like Levi and Papoose. But when it comes to Italy, there's always been a question mark. Now, with the arrival of Pantano, his subsequent publication of the Hermetic Physician and the Magic Door, we finally have an entryway into this new world. And now, with his most recent publication, Alchemical Hermeticism, inscribed in this tome is the life and teachings of arguably the Miriam's greatest initiate, Marco Daffi. Without further ado, let us uncover the mysteries. Alrighty, so let's just jump right into it. So, David, I wanted to ask about when we're talking about like Italic Hermeticism, to set like a scene. There's all these kind of orders around the place in Italy. So like High Masonry, there's the group, there's the Cremires, the Miriam. I wanted to like kind of ask though, because I read your Magic Door book as well, and they talked a little bit about Rosicrucian kind of groups there. I was kind of curious, is there like Italic Rosicrucian scene in Italy? Or like a native one? Or is there like just this creep of French and German orders trying to take territory or something like that?
No, though there definitely is a homegrown Italian or Italic version of the Rosicrucian order, of the Golden Rosicrucian order, that dates back to an interesting adept named Federico Gualdi, there's actually really a few good books, books that contain his writings on this form of alchemical hermeticism, and it dates back to the mid 1600s. And there's a famous monument in Rome called the Magic Door. And it was basically this Italic order of golden Rosicrucians that constructed this magic door, and it supposedly contains the formula to achieve the Philosopher's Stone. And there was a circle under the tutelage of Queen Christina of Sweden, who moved from Sweden to Rome, and she was heavily involved in Hermeticism, and specifically with this Italic version of the Rose Cross.
That's fascinating. And so that order's still kind of around?
Well, there's a lot of claimants, just like there
Yeah.
is in most societies. Same with the Miriam and so forth. Marco Daffi says that for any seeker who's interested to get in touch with a true order that's doing some remarkable work, then you really have to be picky and choosy and just don't go in naively. And sometimes the actual true adherents to the traditions of initiatic order are not so much those who are most publicized, who are most common and most easily to be found. And I know specifically in the Italic world that it's actually just, the individuals who are doing their own path or working in a very small circle
Mm.
who've made some realizations. And you can tell by the energy, you can tell by they're just not rehashing stuff that they read from literature, that there's a lot of inner laboratory work, and that they're able to articulate the stages of development and of realization that they've achieved. So yeah, in a sense, the Rosicrucian order, there's a couple that I'm aware of focused around Naples, that's associated with the archive of the Egyptian order, which is sort of like
Very interesting.
the overseeing body of the Miriam.
Because I was gonna ask then, what's the relationship between the Rosicrucian groups and the Miriam then? Are they friends or?
Yeah, I know. So the Miriam was founded 1895 by Giuliano Kremerz, who was an initiate of this Egyptian order, which is sort of this overseeing body of the 12 sages that oversaw a number of initiatic groups in Italy at that time. So specifically with the Egyptian rites of Freemasonry, those associated with Cagliostro, with the rite of Mizraim and rite of Memphis and rite of Memphis, Mizraim, etc. But there are also those associated with Martinism, specifically
Okay.
the Order of Martinism associated with Eliphas Levi. And then there was this Rosicrucian order that Steiner came to become initiated with, and Blavatsky as well, by this initiate called Giustiano Lebano,
Oh, that's
who was,
interesting.
yeah, who is the, I guess, the benefactor of this archive of this Egyptian order.
That's interesting. You mentioned Steiner. So Steiner came to Italy or was in some kind of communication with
Yeah, no,
this?
Steiner came to Italy specifically to meet with Lebano, because Steiner was the head of the Memphis Mizraim
Hmm.
in the German-speaking world at the time. So there was definitely a collaboration.
That's so interesting. So it's like through the kind of Egyptian Memphis Mizraim, and there's like
Yeah.
the Rosa. That's so interesting. That's so interesting.
And those who are really who want to pursue the connection between this Egyptian order and Rosicrucians, and I would suggest they read the works of, oh, the name just
Oh no.
escaped me, of Byler Lytton.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Byler Lytton? He wrote the
No.
Zanoni, The Last Days of Pompeii.
Oh, the Bulwer Linton. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. That guy. Yeah. Okay. So
So
he's
yeah, so he actually went and became initiated in
no
this
way.
Rosicrucian order of the Egyptian order
No
in
way.
Naples. Yeah, so this would have been not with Lebano, but Lebano's predecessor,
Okay.
a guy named Domenico Bocchini.
That's so interesting.
Who,
In a little timeline, is that would you know just off the top of your head
the
if that was
timeline was about 1837.
I was gonna say, is that like prior to his publication of like the Vril coming race and stuff like that in Zanoni?
That I don't know, but it definitely prior to Zanoni
Because
and the
yeah, I've always wondered in the book Zanoni in the preface, he writes how he meets a Rosicrucian and got the manuscripts, but it's a half-finished book, and then he's saying this book Zanoni is finished by me, but you'll never know what parts were from this Rosicrucian and what parts are from me. And I'm like, oh, is there some kind of connection? I've always wondered
there's a
about that.
connection right there. Yeah.
I've always wondered about that's so interesting. Oh my
Yeah.
God. But anyway, getting back to Daffy though. So we were talking. So Daffy, it's interesting when reading this, it seems like so Daffy had these before he joined the Miriam, he still had he had this yearning for kind of magic and occultism, or did he have any prior training? Or was he just kind of absorbed immediately into the Miriam? Because it seems like he just kind of fell into it really
Well,
easily.
Daffy was never part of the Miriam per se.
Oh, okay.
He was introduced to Kremerz by the head of the Roman-based Miriam, and there was an immediate connection. Kremerz saw right away that this was an extraordinary individual with a remarkable, very refined consciousness. With his knowledge at a doctrinal level was exceptional. However, he also noted that mentally, or he wasn't fully stable, and so what he discouraged Daffy from entering into the Miriam, and rather he
Okay.
took Daffy on as a direct disciple. And Daffy came with him with a preset existential issue that he needed
Hmm.
addressed, which was his instability that he recognized as well, and specifically with his emotional center,
Hmm.
which in the Miriamic constitution of being is called the lunar body. So it's basically that astral body, the spiritus, so the sublimated consciousness from the physical level, typically associated with their dreams and with intuition, that type of thing. So it's sort of like the crossroads between your deeper soul and your physical body. So it's a very important lever in terms of working on yourself,
Mm,
because it is sort of like that hinge between going deeper in yourself and also being able to transmit deeper solar energy to your to the physical self. So
mm.
until one can purify and integrate the lunar body within your other four bodies, it can be very much a disabling factor. And we see that with a lot of initiates or neophytes, is that they're not able to calm
Mm.
to separate the subtle from the gross in their sublimated self. Because I mean, a lot of times neophytes that come in knocking on the door of initiation, they're coming from a concentration from of their consciousness at a physical level, of a samsaric level. And when you do practices that involve internalization, that internalization, internal
Mm.
world has yet to be tapped, and it's very open to a lot of fluxes from the irrational, from karmic disturbances as well, and it can be overwhelming. And that's why it's important for initiate or a neophyte to find a master who can diagnose some of these instabilities and digressions, to be able to work with
Mm.
the individual so they can get over and they can address some of the inhibitions, the constraints that they have at that psychological level.
It's really important what you just said there, talking about an initiation and the purification that precedes the illumination, or the connection
Exactly,
to the
yeah.
higher. It's the with because I've always wondered about initiatic purification. It's like I found like to go deeper in that. When people think of purification, they just think of like nowadays, what do they think of? They think of almost something moralistic. But in initiatic purification, there seems to be something more than just the moralism. It's like a
Yes, I
concentration.
mean the moralism is very at a superficial level.
Mm,
So in initiation, purification of your lunar body. Again, the lunar body is that the subtle body, those who are able to sublimate their consciousness from the external senses to the internal senses.
mm,
And so basically, what we're talking about here is consciousness that can separate from external inputs. So that samsaric inputs, the flux from every day,
mm,
and also at a subtle level, is that the projections of other individual disturbances. There's a tendency when you do initiation that you're susceptible to that. I mean, Jung writes about that in the law of transfer, that when you're in a social setting, there's the lunar bodies from individuals actually get projected, and those who aren't
mm,
aware of it actually are internalizing that. And so one always has to be constantly purifying. It's not just like
mm.
it's a one step and so forth. The purification
Okay,
needs to be done on a daily basis, probably with your daily ritual.
that's interesting.
And
So,
so you're able to cleanse and to, because for initiate, the most important aspect is your consciousness.
mm,
And the first really um, milestone in initiation is to find the primary matter, the materia prima.
mm,
So to be able to separate that consciousness from all the flux and all the profane
mm.
attachments to it.
Yeah.
And so there's an operation of a redaction and contraction
Mm.
of consciousness. So typically it can be done in a meditative setting where one is finds a quiet place, then close their eyes and just let go of the day. Any memories or thought, they let that go. So they detach from external um, sensations, but also from any internal, and just come to that sense of of pureness of consciousness without any attachment.
Mm.
Or if you go any further, then you lose your sense of self. So it's like that
Mm.
irreducible primal state of being. That's your materia prima. That's your primer state. That's the consciousness that you need to bring as an initiate to advance. But once you find when you reach that state, you find that there's other kind of internal pathway, internal streams that come forth. And those are typically from your karma, from ancestral. And then that's part of your first work is you're entering into that black phase, that nigredo, where you're dealing with your unconscious, those unconscious streams of energy, those urges, those disturbances, those unsettling thoughts or projections that come from that unconscious. And that's a lot of work to be able to calm the waters, to be able
Mm.
to purify it, to address the disturbances, the karmic impurities, impediments with the appropriate virtues, so one can get over that, release it, so the consciousness can stream up to another level, which is typically called the purgatorio, the
Mm.
albedo, the white state. And at that state, it's typically referred to as a mountain, is that where you need to internalize and integrate the seven virtues, the seven cardinal virtues. And at
Very
that point
interesting.
is you shut out hermetically the streams from the samsaric, the external senses, but also from the karmic. So you're able to liberate yourself from that. And that's what typically Jung refers to as the process of individuation.
Mm.
And then finally, at the Rubedo or the red state is where you find your mission, your purpose in life, and you realize that. So
That's
they're very
beautiful.
much in that white state. In the purgatorio is when you find your true self, your true name, and your true purpose in life, and that becomes the goal of your terrestrial existence.
That's beautiful. And so in the white stage, you learn your true name. In the red stage, that's the actualization in the world. You find your
Exactly.
purpose, and you work.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And
You.
it's an
Mm.
ongoing process cycle. So it's
Mm.
not like you end there and you
Mm.
reach nirvana and that's it. It's sort of like that leads to a whole nother cycle
Mm.
of being and so on and so
Yeah,
forth.
that's beautiful. You said some things that I didn't want to. I don't want to stop you because you clearly were going on going on something there. But I like the when you were talking about finding in the unconscious that root of the being. Reminded me of something in the book that you was a very interesting distinction. The distinction of being essence monad. If maybe we can kind of get into that because it seems like you're saying that the being is like a general term for the entire system of the human, including all the bodies and everything. And then if you kind of cut it in half, there's a conscious and unconscious part. And in the unconscious is the monad, and in the conscious part is the essence and all the psychic and structures of energy, which are the bodies. Can you kind
Exactly.
of, am I
Yeah,
on the
no,
right track
you
there?
said it very well. So basically, the essence of being is the monad.
Okay.
And the monad has two components, an unconscious, which typically where your life force resides, and
Mm.
the conscious part is, as you indicated, the root of the four bodies, the four conscious bodies,
Mm.
the Saturn, the lunar, mercurial, and solar. And at the end of our physical existence, the conscious part, the new what we call the numen of the soul, it extinguishes, but it doesn't die.
Mm.
For some people, it does. For some people, those who aren't able to formulate or form that body of light, that integrated consciousness, then typically at one's physical death, then that light just slowly fades away and gets absorbed into the greater light system of the spirit world.
So you would say most people nowadays.
Yeah, you said that. So, but that's a reality.
Yep.
So but those who are able to arrive at this state of integration where the concentration of their consciousness is not at the physical level or Saturnian level, but at the root, at that
Mm,
solar level, or which is called the numen or the soul, then at the moment of expiration of the physical body, then the energies associated with consciousness integrate between the lunar, the mercurial, and the solar itself. And then that is rooted into the monad, which is the unconscious self.
mm,
And then typically there are those who are of a very high degree of integration and of consciousness can perpetuate that consciousness in the astral plane. For most people, though, that consciousness, that Newman recedes into the nomen, into the monad. So what it's saying is that the light, the inner light of consciousness becomes dormant, but however the vital body, the life force still is present as a monad, as a spur in the astral world. And then at a future propitious moment, then that monad will take root and consciousness will form, and then it will condense down into the four bodies, and then a reincarnation occur or a reestablishment, a
mm.
reestablishment in the physical world can precipitate.
That's really interesting. Just to wrap my head around kind of what you just said, because that's one thing I found interesting. You have the system seems to have those four bodies: the Saturnian, which is like the planetary body, the dense one, the lunar emotional, the mercurial mental, and then there's that solar one. And you said the solar is that Newman, that is a
Yes, it's a Newman. It's also referred to the divine plane.
mm,
So it's the principle of consciousness itself.
mm, mm.
So the principle of yourself.
Okay, okay, it's
Yeah.
very interesting. And so, but then there's also the vital body or the vital aspect,
Yeah.
which at one point you call I think it's called the second wood of life or the secret wood of life or something like that.
Well, the second wood of life is basically the goal
Mm,
of adepts is to, as I indicated earlier, is to be able to transfer their center of consciousness from the external senses to that Newman.
mm,
So when the physical body separates, that the energetic body, the lunar, mercurial, align and integrate back to the solar body,
mm.
and it's able to persist in an astral level, in the spiritual world, as a what they call the unified energetic field.
That because it's interesting in some like in the theosophical systems they put like an etheric body in between the physical and the astral. And it seems like there's some kind of talk of a vital body or the superior part of that Saturnian body and its use.
Well, the vital body again. So when you break down the essence of being, it retracts into a unicum. So just a one root or seed
Okay. That's
that
yeah.
called this unified or united energetic field. And within that united energetic field, there's a positive polarity and a negative polarity. The positive polarity associated with consciousness, so
Mm.
it projects out like the solarity. The negative polarity or negative energetic field is associated with your vital, your life force.
Okay, okay, so the life force is almost like an undercurrent that undergirds
Yeah.
everything.
So it's
Okay.
similar in the tantric system.
Mm.
Between uh, Shakti and Shiva. So
Very interesting.
yeah,
And there was some talk in the book of the working to unleash this to I think it was Ramirez said you need to become statuesque, and it was almost a technique that he was talking about, which I found very interesting.
yeah. So that, in my understanding of that reference, the statuesque is though and typically addressed to neophytes, so have who have difficulty finding some sort of tangible results with their rituality. So what Karamat suggests, based on his master named Izar, who was a Rosicrucian as well, is that you're able you need to cultivate your interior life, your consciousness, your conscience. So
Mm.
most people consciousness is associated with these five senses, and you there's nothing
Mm.
going on underneath that, unfortunately. So to awaken your inner light, then the what Kramertz or Izar recommends is that you freeze your physical body into a statue. So what that means is that you practice the shutting down of your physical body. So not moving and relaxing your breath, all those physical components so they can slowly just fade away. So you're able to open up and have an inner life that you can, like a garden, that you can cultivate.
Mm.
So what does that mean is you separate the subtle from the rough, all those instincts and all those angers and some of those recursive thinking and so forth. You work to detach from them, to take away the power from them. So you're just pure light, pure awareness without any movement.
Mm.
The physical body, in a lot of cases, because we are so easily distracted by anything physical, becomes a hindrance for developing that inner light, that inner body. So that's my understanding when they recommend is that to accelerate your inner development is get in the habit of turning your body into a statue. So there's
Mm.
no movement, there's no impulse, there's no sensation from it. So when you're able to take away the sensation from the physical body, you're opening up the inner sensations, the feelings,
Mm.
the thoughts, the rhythms, the temperatures. There's a lot of things going on, but people aren't able to see it and feel it and experience it because they're so tied to the objects of their external senses.
It was, yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you for that. It was really interesting because it just seems like, oh, this is like a Western kind of term of like a kind of almost a yoga or a qigong or something, to like you become a kind of a statue and you just kind of become observant. Or to use the systems analogy when looking at that, the levels, the Saturnian, planetary, and the lunar and the Mercury, it seems like you're using the mercurial to kind of become a negating principle that negates the movement of the physical, the Saturnian, and then it kind of like you negate the emotions, make them more calm, and then it needs to negate itself. The Mercury negates itself, and then the Newman can shine.
Yeah,
Am I on the right track there?
I think you are. So basically, the what the that teaching is alluding to is those on this path, the Miriamic path, need to change the course of their consciousness. So most consciousness, the external senses are impacting our internal senses, our emotions. Our emotions are impacting our intelligence. Our intelligence over time creates this reservoir, which is this part of this archetypal self, which is the
Mm.
solar. In the Miriam, the development is the other way, is that you do this inner work and you discover your life purpose, representing your solar aspect, and that represents the principles and values of your mercurial self. You
Mm.
understand what are your qualities and what are what are those intellectual forces that represent who you are in your mission, and that precipitates down into your emotional centers. And then from your emotional centers, it projects out into your thoughts, your words, your behavior, your comportment, all those kind of
Mm.
things. So it's a changing in the course of consciousness from external to internal, from internal and sidereal to external and terrestrial.
Yeah, beautiful. This is really interesting. And there was one other thing you mentioned back there when we were talking about illumination and this awakening. And I like the term awakening, but awakening is so often misused by New Age types nowadays. Like anyone can awaken, or everyone's already awake, or everyone's already a master, or to be awake, or you just need to change your political opinion. But awakening has always been something different in the initiatic sense, and I've always tried to like struggle like it's initiation is an initiate has different knowledge from a normal person, whether it be like secrets of nature or knowledge of higher worlds. But in this, you at one point you talked about the two paths of initiation. There's this mystic one, but then there's one of remembrance. It seems like the initiate is someone who gains this knowledge of past lives, gains this inner knowledge, I should say. Can you talk about the remembrance, or that
Yeah,
term was
so
interesting?
Nemesen, or remembrance, memory recall, is an important technique that initiates should develop to work on expanding and accessing their solarity into their mercurial and emotional bodies. So, what does that mean as the ability to have memory recall at will, to remember your dreams at will? Because dreams, imagination, trances, those are all your subconscious and unconscious projecting outward. So, it's very rich with karmic information, with your ancestral or numinal
Mm.
information that precedes your historical self. So an initiate wants to encourage that. Again, we talked about earlier about changing the flow of consciousness from the external to upwards the other way. So working on your memory builds those magnetic qualities of
Okay.
extracting the gold
Mm.
filaments from your solar body and to be able to project them outwards for use and for to keep that connection of your concentration or your centeredness at that solar or mercurial level.
That's
So,
interesting.
so it's a very important tool. It's for magnetism, and magnetism in the
Mm.
Hermetian system is one of the most applied techniques of initiate. So, initiate is able to purify themselves. So, enter into this state of heightened consciousness where he's detached from physical and external impulses and detach from some of the karmic disturbances that he's hopefully been able to put to rest and or to transform. Is um, that body of light or that state of consciousness has very strong magnetic properties. So both in its projection and its on receiving. So in terms of receiving, it's very good to diagnose if you're working in a therapeutic environment where someone's having going through hard times, a family member or a loved one or friends or whatever, and that you want to understand what the causal issue that's behind that. So having being able to enter into that state of Miriam, this Miriam is that state of purity
Okay.
where these magnetic forces, both the polar positive, the solar, and the negative receiving, are at play, and one uses that for for good, for
Mm.
benevolence, for a purpose higher than just the ego or for the small historical self.
And this remembrance extends into a not just a remembrance of what we've experienced in this life, but like drawing from memories from the monad, from other modes of being, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, yeah, it's so as I mentioned, so the initiate who's developed this rich garden of an interior life, then their world is more the figures, the scenarios, the images that they encounter and experience is more than just what's in this external
Mm.
screen that a lot of us live in. So they again the internal projections from dreams, from intuitions, from imaginations, from trances, from rituals, from even psychotropic drugs. That's are all important material for the initiate to understand where they're coming from because when how consciousness is the same in all states of consciousness, in all states, whether it's in the astral or in the in the state of relativity, what I call the physical world,
Mm.
or in some of these heightened states. Your sense of being doesn't change, and nor should it. But the figures, the scenarios, the laws of nature are different in different states of consciousness. But the key for memory is that to be able to for consciousness to be able to extract input from these different states of being, from these transcendent states, and to be able to make sense of it, to understand
Yes.
how it fits into your path, into your purpose, because it's very rich with, as I mentioned, archetypal information, talking about the core of who you are at that solar level.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So to describe the phenomenology of it, like in that process of learning, so we you do this memory work, and to just describe in the way that I understand, it's like when I do memory work, it's like I'm calling to something, and it arrives. And so it seems from what you're saying that a Miriam adept gets to a certain point where if they're presented with something like someone who's sick, they can kind of call like what is the sickness or what's the answer, and something just like how a memory would appear, they can call to the answer, even if it's a sickness they've never seen before, and the answer will kind of come as a kind of a representation.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's just one application. There are
Mm,
other applications. For example, if you're in doing dream work and so forth, and you make aware not only of the situation you're in and maybe your reactions, the emotions, but also the environment, the season, is it rural or
okay, yeah.
urban? So you
Yeah.
extrapolate from that these patterns,
Mm,
and that helps you to equate where you're coming from and what is the most common features of yourself and your environment in these different states. So it builds up a profile of who you are and what your traditions are, based on these signals that come into your consciousness in these transcendent states.
mm, mm. This is absolutely fascinating. Okay, let
And
me
from
just.
that, you're able to discern some very key information on who you are.
Mm.
So certain numbers, certain sounds, certain vowels, colors,
Ooh.
they make appearance. They have a special resonance with you. And one needs to be acknowledge that and be aware of it, because that helps to put together, as I mentioned, a profile of who
Mm.
you are at a deeper level.
That's interesting. So I guess through this method, you could also almost build your own. At a certain point, it's like you almost build your own system, like via almost intuition or
Yeah, and
something.
it's not so much and again, here's where the memory comes in. It's not so much building your own system in sense that it's self-determined. It's a
Yeah, yeah.
sense of going back to find out who you are.
Mm,
But it's not a you one still has, as I mentioned, your consciousness doesn't change, and part of your consciousness is your free will. So it also gives you insight in terms of how to correct some qualities that aren't that you would like to change. Put it that way. Yeah.
yes.
So
Okay.
so one has a dream and one's confronted with a situation, and maybe how one comports oneself in that dream isn't in and upon reflection is not ideally how one would do. Maybe one should have done a cost benefit analysis and said, if I would have done this and that. But it's all lessons. It's not done
Mm,
at a moralistic or a judgmental. It's actually your subconscious digging into your unconscious and providing you with lessons, with teachings.
mm. Very
And so it
interesting.
helps you to understand, and then you can, in your mind, you can go and correct that. So if there's a similar, and typically these things are recursive, it's just that you don't know when they'll come up. And then a similar type of scenario, then you would act in a manner that is appropriate to your level of a
Mm.
consciousness and so on and so forth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, no, that makes sense. That makes sense.
So
That's
that's where the
interesting.
memory comes into play, is that you're able to a very subtle sense of detail,
Mm,
so you don't miss some of the things that other people would overlook, that you're looking at for some of these qualifiers to understand, to be able to put together a profile
Mm.
of where you're at in your in your progression, in your
Mm.
emancipation, or in your evolution.
So, like to give an example, it's like as you said in the albedo stage, when you're kind of going up the mountain, there's the seven virtues. It's going to be the same virtues for each person, but how they integrate them would be different, and that's why you need this ability or these
Yeah,
kind of attributes.
exactly. And you find, I mean, it's typical for an initiate, for an adept, that you want to work on all seven virtues, but there'll
Mm.
be some based on what your life purpose, you're going to be stronger in
Mm.
others, right?
Mm.
So that's another, again, where the your memory comes into play, is that you're in these scenarios where you're either, some form of archetype that resonates with you.
Mm. Very interesting. Ah, there was one part that was really interesting. I think it was Ramirez talking about astral beings, and he said there was like two ways to view them. You can view them as objective other beings, or there's the this way of viewing them as just subjective things as part of yourself. But then he goes, and both ways are kind of correct.
Yeah, so
Because
astral intelligence, astral beings are non-physical intelligences.
because this would connect to the theurgic component of the Miriam, if I'm not correct.
Yes, it does. Yes. And so they are independent entities. So it's not just figments of your imagination. However, the based on the contents of your consciousness, as we talked about, that's why it's important to be
Mm.
able to do these memory work, is to release that, to understand the forces are at play that most of us are not aware of, because these are very highly adapted work we're talking about. This isn't for your general Freemasonry type of uh, you know work that we're doing. So there's something called simulus simulus. So the energy you push out is the energy that you receive. So the energy you project. So when you're doing these inner works and you enter into these transcendent states, and you are open up into this universe, or into this environment, where this is phantasmagoria, and there could be entities that take an anthropomorphic component to it, but they are basically your subconscious projecting an
Mm.
anthropomorphic, but there are actually independent, intelligent entities on their own behalf. And I mentioned earlier, so the one needs to be aware of it and understand what it is, but one needs to not surrender to it, to
Mm.
be clear. So any form of cohabitation is expressly discouraged, because what it does is it weakens, it dilutes your own nucleus, your own
So,
solar
so
self.
no binding or making pacts with spirits or anything.
That's been my
Yeah.
that's my way. What other people do is
Mm.
their business, but that's been my way. My way is the path of the hero.
Mm.
So the path of the hero is you have a descent into the underworld, into your unconscious. You come up with these various light entities based on the work that you need to do. And that provides you with information in terms of what to release from, and so on and
Okay.
so forth. And then once you reach a certain level, these entities, as Daffy mentions, they fade away, and it's
Mm.
just this pure consciousness. And again, you're up to these seven, you're up to the mountain, and you have these
Mm.
seven universal lights, or sidereal lights,
Okay.
part of your sidereal body. So this is your Mercurial and lunar body that you need to work on. You need to integrate. You need to master. You need to metabolize, and to
Okay.
be able to project them out into a terrestrial, or into the state of relativity.
Okay.
So it's, to me, these astral entities are typically, when one enters the beginning of the practice, based on the contents of one's consciousness, of one's unconscious, that are making an appearance, because
Mm.
you're in the subtle form.
So,
And it's a very
yeah.
dangerous situation, because it's, for a lot of people, it's overwhelming. For a lot of people, they lose themselves with that.
Mm.
Well, leave it like that.
So it's there is an objective being, and when it uh how would you put it, when it not connects, when it interacts with your system, your own representation is just painted on top of it and you kind of interact with that. And perhaps this is why, like, there was one point where in the book where you mentioned the adepts do some kind of digestion, or it's important that they hermetically digest symbols. Is this connected to that, like the di digestion of symbols, so that you can like interpret what you're seeing properly and you're not lost into it? Or is this another, the digestion of symbols is a part of another aspect?
Well, the digestion of symbols. So symbols is the universal language.
Hmm.
So at this point, we're talking about structuralism.
Okay.
So,
Uh,
form and so what these entities are basically forms.
okay.
And, the
Okay.
structure of
Like
the
platonic
form,
forms? Or
they could be if you
okay.
coming. So again, it's you're projecting out your so it's you can find that in a lot of these figures they have a certain race and a
Mm,
lot of times that's just a projection from your own environment, from your own environment.
yeah.
So it's not because they are that race, it's just that you're projecting, you're seeing them that way. Your perception of this intelligent light has a certain form and has a certain color and texture and qualities and properties and so forth. But they are
Mm.
independent entities that have their own will.
Okay.
And
Very
some are
interesting.
good and some are bad and some are neutral.
Okay.
But
Do they classify them in the Miriam in the same way, like celestial and goetic or chthonic or atavistic or things like that? Or like
yeah, they're like you have your archangels and your angels and then you've got your various daemons and so on. But these are called aeons. So
okay.
typically as I mentioned, when it's in the environment of a neophyte, when they first do the inner work, the first projections that they experience at this subtle level are these intelligence beings that aren't figures of their dream because they have an independence to them. They can move
Mm,
on their own and they can interact and communicate on your own, either verbally or through telepathy or whatever it is. So again, one needs to be neutral with it. So the important of the dignity of the individual, of the consciousness, should never be compromised in
okay.
any of this work.
Mm,
That's very important. It's
yep.
not enough emphasized.
Mm, mm. And one thing, going back, you mentioned the path of heroism as this path that you follow. I got to pick your brain on this, just to jump into a completely different topic. But I've always wondered. I think I've asked this. You've been asked this question before, but on the relationship between, or the relationship between Evola and Daffy. Because Julius Evola seems to be a guy who's interested in magic, interested in initiation. He wants that aristocratic nature. He wants to return to tradition. And then you got this guy, Marco Daffi, who is an aristocrat, who's a part of an initiatic lineage, who, has his past lives returned to tradition. It seems like Marco Daffi is like Evola's ideal, but there doesn't seem to be any interest, or like what was the kind of the relationship?
Yeah, no, that's interesting you bring that up. There are passages in the book Alchemical Hermeticism where Daffy talks about Evola, where he says he's when it comes to matters of Hermeticism, of magic, Evola, Daffy considers Evola more of a scholar than a practitioner, someone who really hasn't got his hands dirty in the material.
Mm,
Um, so again, when Evola writes about tradition and talks about aristocracy, that's from his worldview that is political, that is based on his conception, not his conception. It's a tradition that he embraces, which is a very much a Platonic worldview
mm,
where you've got these hierarchy of beings and so forth. In initiation, it's basically the aristocracy of the soul.
mm,
It's you're very much on your own. Any groups or any kind of titles
mm,
that are conferred to you aren't valuable in the other world, in the transcendent world. You are That's why alchemical hermeticism is different from other forms of alchemy that uses material, spagyric or minerals that the subject and the object is one and the same thing. So it's basically it's those who can and those who can't, or those who reach a certain level. And it's not about and so alchemical medicine is very much an individual path. That's why I call it the path of the hero.
Mm. Mm.
It's not you don't do it in, in a group, in a circle and so forth. But there is circle work. In the Miriam, there's these, as we talk about these therapeutic energies that are
Mm.
induced and transferred. And that's part of I mean, the Miriam is a lunar base practice. So it's
Mm.
about working with natural magic using the various configurations, celestial configurations, using, seasonal adjustments to be able to tap into certain energies that can be redirected and repurposed for practical reasons, to help people who are down, who have lacking energy. This chain of purified souls that have this vitality are able to project that, and it can have tangible results, similar to like magnetism. Is
Mm.
that you need someone who is this has this surplus of vitality, of positive energy, but you have to be able to find the right virtues to connect, because not everyone who's reacts to someone with this in the same way. So that's the diagnosis component is very important to
Mm.
determine the appropriate energy that would help an afflicted person.
And
So I kind of we veered off of
yeah,
Evola,
we,
but yeah, so it's not
did Evola know about Daffy or?
oh, I'm sure they did because they were both Roman
Mm.
based and they had similar friends and so forth. But Evola was very much his own man, right? He
Mm.
was,
He was too
he was
aloof.
after the war, he was crippled in his wheelchair and he didn't get around much. But I get a sense there was a bit of a rivalry,
Mm.
or they weren't close. There's no knowledge that they actually met or had any form of correspondence. But
Okay.
so Evola was in touch with these hierarchs of the Egyptian order, as was Dafi. So
Oh, really?
yeah, so they're
And
they're probably and Evola was connected with this head of the Roman Miriam that Dafi was first introduced to Kremers from. So there are
and
a
so
number
so
of different
Evola never
intersections.
pursued initiation in those groups? Evola never pursued initiation in those groups?
Apparently, he did in the Miriam.
Oh.
Yeah, and yeah, so there's this priest called Padre Oliva who provided Evola with some of the secret manuscripts, and
Ah.
some of that's quoted in the third volume of the Introduction to Magic by the
Mm.
Year Group. So he's obviously had a connection with the Miriam, and he spoke highly of Kremertz of all.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
potential that Evola did do some kind of working, but never didn't reach the degree of Daffy or anything.
I don't think so. So I know, so one of my teachers in the Miriam who knew Evola very well and knew Dafi as
Okay.
well. And he said Evola had a magnetic power. He
Mm.
had a very strong, subtle magnetic power that was tangible.
Very
And
interesting.
yeah, so he wasn't just a bookworm. He actually, according to this individual who's very highly respected, who's a magistrate,
Very interesting.
he and likewise, he mentions Daffy had this sense of clairvoyance that was
Mm.
out of the ordinary.
Mm. And to talk about what is it, some other opinions that Daffy had, I just got to mention this. I want to hear your take on this because I read this part of the book and I was completely scandalized. I was like, "What?
Fulcanelli?
Yes, yes. What is it? Letter dated June, was it 2nd, 1962. Fulcanelli wasn't a real initiate. He was just a copyist." And I was like, what? What was his, well, I haven't studied deeply into Fulcanelli, but what was his take on Fulcanelli that led him to believe that? Or that led him to that
Well, I
conclusion?
think you have to read Fulcanelli. I like and adore Fulcanelli, but you have to read the you have
Okay.
to read his work. It doesn't come to the same level of initiation
Hmm.
as Daffy does,
Okay. Wow.
but it's very, very, I mean, it's great material.
Okay.
The language of the birds, the symbolism
Mm, mm,
of the church, but it doesn't steer deep into the trajectory of the human being
mm.
as you will find in this work, in
Very.
my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Daffy is alluding to.
Okay.
Um,
And then also in that bit, he also just said like, oh yeah, and Balzac was a higher initiate than Dante.
yeah, I have no opinion. I'm not familiar with
Because
Balzac.
well, that's just it. I'm not much of a literally nerd
Yeah.
either, so I know who Balzac is, but I'm like, what was like it about Balzac that he was like, oh, he's better than Dante? Like, did you just understand human nature better? Like, why did he consider Balzac like a higher initiate than Dante?
Yeah, I mean, we're really going off on the tangent on this, but so even like with Rabelais, with D'Artagnan and so forth, they get into some very realistic animations that normal imagination couldn't touch in. So I suspect, again, I don't know
Mm,
these authors very well, but just through
okay.
my own cursory understanding, just you're able to read the sort of surrealistic world or landscape that they're articulating, 300 years ago, it would lead Daffy to say that these people didn't come up with this information based on scholarly work, based on their imagination. These are experiences of this hyper reality that their own consciousness, the flight of their own consciousness have made, and their works is imbued with these type of transcendent entities.
That's so fascinating. Now I'm just like, God, do I now I have to read Balzac because apparently
Yeah.
Balzac was even higher initiate than Fulcanelli, well, as well as
Yeah, I
Dante.
mean, I would take that again. These I would take that with a grain of salt because
Mm,
I mean when I've read Fulcanelli, it wasn't like I was wowed that this is the truth I've been looking for
mm,
all my life. Again, it's very interesting and it's very symbolically rich information, but initiate wise, I think
mm.
there's a lot of many gaps that it doesn't touch on.
Re-talking about re-bringing up the Miriam again. This was also something I just wanted to ask on. So there's that bit where you mention how Abraxas, Quadrelli, was talking to Crimirez, and Crimirez said something about how he wanted to decrystallize the Miriam. And I was wondering why that was. Was that because the Miriam wasn't getting its results? Like I believe at one point he
Yeah.
said,
So
all of his students were reincarnated Frenchmen. They didn't have the souls of true Italians or something." But like,
yeah. That's funny. So that actually that passage is explained a little further in my previous book, The Hermetic Physician. But
ah,
what Kremer's is talking about, and again, Quadrelli was a member of the Ur group as well as of the Miriam, so another connection between Evola and Kremer's.
mm,
So what Kremer's was talking about was that after 30 years, so we're talking, he's writing to Quadrelli in the late 20s. So after 30 years of the Miriam being in place, he felt that its minimum goals were not achieved, that none of the hierarchs of the Miriam who reached that master stage were actually a master in the Egyptian sense.
mm,
And he felt, the problem that why he wanted to decrystallize it is that the plebeian element entered into it, that initiates or neophytes who entered the Miriam were entering it to get titles, to get
mm,
recognition, and not about, that inner evolution,
mm,
that trajectory that will take in the consciousness out from itself into the higher realms.
mm. Because
So he felt so part of his statutes and goals of the Miriam was to get as many initiates into the Miriam because the when they do the rituals, that energy that would be transmitted would be centralized and then it would be projected out. So the more praying souls that you had, the more that positive
okay,
energy would lead to a greater force to be used. But he realized that unless the the purification occurred is that, this energy that was being transmitted was unstable, was actually weighted down, and it wasn't very useful. And that better results could be made by individuals who had reached this higher level in terms of transmitting purified energy or the vital force, and then with a greater number of adherents who weren't as progressed in their inner path.
That's yeah, yeah. It's interesting. So he wanted to decrystallize it, and he did he have some kind of plan of what he wanted to recrystallize, like the Neo Miriam, like what was going to
Yeah,
be
it's I
the new
not that I'm
structure?
aware of. So he
Okay.
died in 1930, and I
Mm,
think his last book was called The Dialogues of Hermeticism, where he was talking about, in the future and so forth, coming up with sort of like these energetic therapeutic centers. So much like we find now with psychosomatic type of healing. So he was envisioning, having clinics like that and so on and so forth. But I don't think he fully articulated the new vision that the Miriam was
mm.
was to reincarnate or transform into.
Because the next question I wanted to ask is like, do the different Miriam groups that exist nowadays kind of know that? Like, oh, Ramirez was actually just going to decrystallize it and do something else. Like, are they
Yeah,
aware
I
of
think
that?
it's a pretty common a pretty common knowledge for that. It's still, everybody does their own thing. So
Mm.
there's no centralized body of the Miriam now. I mean, anybody can call themselves a fraternity of Miriam and
Yeah.
post something on the web and get some people in there and practice and say that, they're the legitimate successors of Kremers. That's what I mentioned about earlier, even with the Rosicrucians. You really need
Mm.
to buyer beware because you really need to investigate before you associate yourself because instead of like working on, clearing out your house, you could be, receiving other people's negative disturbances and karmic issues. So be careful,
No.
use your common sense. If it doesn't look good, smell good, taste good, probably not good for you.
No, it sounds good. Investigate before associate. Those are words to live by.
Nice.
There was one part where there was one part in the text where it began speaking about Eros, and it said in the beginning stages, the Mercury must be made passive in response to Eros, or in connection to Eros, in regard to Eros, I should say.
Eros is an interesting concept because there was I guess, a disagreement among adepts between Daffi and Kremertz. So Kremertz was of would counsel initiates when they're doing any type of theurgical work to practice a form of continence in the sense that those who cultivated erotic impulses were really tying their consciousness down to the elementals. So
Hmm.
the elevation of consciousness that was required in doing these transcendent work would be hampered because of the the erotic impulses which come from the earth, which comes from the animal instinct. So those type of spirits or those type of energies, you are be what I talked about, similar, what you're projecting out in inner
Hmm.
space, and that's what you'd be receiving back is elementals. And elementals can be very dangerous because they're very vampiric. They need to
Yes.
get energy. So Kremertz, recommended, 15 days, 20, 30, 20, 30 days of continence. When one does these practices, then one has a greater ability to reach that level of consciousness or reach that astral plane that's commiserate to the purpose of the ritual or of the practice intended.
And
Daffy was a different opinion in the sense that he felt Eros, when it's transformed into Amor, into
hmm.
divine love,
Hmm.
is actually a conduit. So there's this
Ah.
other initiate called Marsilio Ficino from the Renaissance,
Hmm.
you may have heard of. So Ficino talks about the twin aspects of Eros. One is Amor or spiritual love, and one is what we talked about earlier, but is Aphroditic or animalistic, which is very elemental based. So Daffy actually countered or took to task Kremert's admonition that, you don't involve yourself in any type of in any type of sexual encounters because it ties you down to the animal world. Whereas Daffy was saying, even better is that you engage in true amorous activities, spiritual love, and that
Mm.
ladder of love is a conduit to reach the higher planes faster.
So did Daffy have some
I think they're
concept?
both right.
Yeah,
They're
yeah, yeah.
just, yeah, yeah,
Different tendencies, but I was going to say, did Daffy,
exactly, yeah.
so did Daffy have like a concept of the sublimation of Eros into Amor, or it's like there's just two different loves and you aim for the superior one? Is there, for the members of the Miriam that were married, was there some form of like Kareza that was taught, like a tantric method of countenance, where uh, Taoist methods of like a dual cultivation, I should say.
Well, yes. So, and I write about that quite extensively in the introduction, and that's where the siren comes into play.
Yes.
So the siren is a hermaphrodite, so half woman and half a sea creature,
Mm.
half fish. And that represents the dual nature we talked about. So it's not woman in the carnal sense, but woman as the Madonna, as the purified, as the Miriam. And that those tendencies of being amphibious, so having a physical body from the waist down, but of a Miriam of the waist up, need to be cultivated to be able to swim in the astral sea and to be able to again project out these energies that one can receive back and use it for one's own purification and self-development. So I go quite extensively into that and articulate what that means from initiate. And I'll leave that for the audience to purchase the book to find out the details.
We don't want to give away too many
Yeah,
secrets.
spoiler alert. Any more
Spoil.
information, no need to read the book.
Sorry, I've just been, yeah. Sorry, we chewed on so much there. You know, but to talk about, because Daffy as well, in regards to that more the Amor, he had his mistresses, and he had his wife. Just like one final like bit to the end of his life, what kind of happened to his mistresses? Because it said that in that previous life
I
that
think two of them
created,
died.
in the previous life that
So
created
his
that imbalance.
mistresses were used as doves. Be
Mm,
familiar with the doves? So doves are typically virginal women, so at a pubescent age, that basically have mediumistic powers, and that the initiate would use for telepath for divination purposes. And a couple of them actually committed suicide.
mm,
Um, and but again, so Daffy, unlike Kremertz, didn't have a negative, didn't see sex or amorous interaction as a impediment, as a vice. Under the right intentions and the right sense of purity, that it actually that negative can be when two negatives are multiplied, it becomes a positive. Again, that's articulated in the book. So that's part and parcel of, I guess, one of the differences of the divergences of vision in terms of the initiate's conduct between Daffy and Kremertz. And it needs to be said, Daffy had a very astute and very illuminated consciousness in the
mm,
sense that he had certain qualities, certain abilities to be able to, for example, predict the lottery numbers or predict
mm,
success in horse races and so forth out of the normal.
mm,
And a lot of that, I think, had to do, I mean, for his training and so forth, a lot of it had to do his ability to intuitive powers to be able to, to catch that magic moment, when to, what number and what, he was very strong with the I Ching as well. So he
Mm,
back to that issue of structuralism. So to understand in what date and under what circumstances, which numbers are actually propitious. And
mm,
again, according to various testimonies, not one but multiple, that his success was above average. Was
mm.
it was difficult to explain in any other ways in the sense that he had a very astute sense of this inner knowledge or inner consciousness.
Yeah, I vaguely remember he saying something about like taking business risks was also a kind of like heroism in like a modern
Well,
time.
he planned out like what his future was, and part of it was the continue was he put together after the war, Daffy put assembled or formed a number of different initiatic chains. One's called the Pleiadic
Mm,
ring, the Andromeda circle, and so forth. And they had three purposes. One was for Hermetic healing. Second was for divination. There was never more than six people, but they included like surgeons
mm,
and literary people, so very high caliber people. And so one was for Hermetic healing. The other was for divination, for to have some monetary income to be able to live and not have to depend on working or other means. And another was for basically other forms of dream interpretation and interpreting of signs and symbols. So that was the purpose of him putting together these chains after the war. So he had a very specific end game. And again, he wasn't doing this for fame. He wasn't writing
mm.
books and having it publish it. It was mostly all the materials from letters, from correspondence.
And do those
And
chains exist to this very day?
yes, which is actually a good sign because it's just not stuff that's repackaged from other writers, from other initiates that he's come across. So it's basically material from his own inner laboratories, from his own experiments, and I think he it comes across as a very much an honest person.
Mm,
He talks about his failures, his challenges, but his success and what he learned and the techniques and processes he used to have success.
mm,
So he talks about, the reaching this avataric state. I think it's the first letter of the philosophical epistolary philosophical letters, where he talks about a neophyte first needs to find a hermetic chain and get initiated into this like Isaac or Miriamic type of initiation for self-purification, and then they'll probably come into contacts with these inner lights and what to do and then how to get beyond that, and then to work on building this body of light or this glorious robe that they call, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's very much he follows a methodical approach, but it's very organic. It's very it's written like my experiment in the lab or doing this, and here are the results. So
mm,
there's a lot of testimonials and experimentation included in the book.
mm. Beautiful, beautiful. And well, thank you, David, for your patience and for indulging me so much.
Ray, this was great.
If
I
anyone wants to
appreciate
learn
the
more,
question.
definitely get the book. But to close off, final question, David, tell us about your upcoming book as well.
Yeah, my next book is sort of the sequel to the Alchemical Hermeticism, called the Hermetic Book of the Dead, where I take extracts from Daffi and from other initiates, myself as well, other contemporary, where we look at entering, how to enter and to do work in these transcendent states. So that'll be coming out in the new year in 2026 with the same publisher, Inner Traditions. Got an article that just appeared in the May-June issue of this year of New Dawn magazine from Australia,
Mm.
called Marco Daffi, the Hermetic Avatar. Encourage the audience to check that out as well. And I'm working on some new material as well for a future book. So try to keep
Ooh.
busy. Plus, I got
Ooh.
my own inner practice going on. on inner meditation.
Mm,
Life's good. And thank you very much for having me.
no
Enjoyed this
problem.
hour.
Thank you so much.